Ladies and gentlemen, most of us, well, we lose an argument the very moment we start raising our voice. But the truly wise? They know that silence, it speaks louder than any scream. You see, we've been conditioned to believe that the one who speaks the loudest, the one who gets that final word, is the victor. But let's look a little closer at the real cost of that victory. Is it really a win if you leave the room with your heart racing and your peace of mind completely shattered? In our desperate search for dominance, we often sacrifice the very thing we were trying to defend, our inner calm. We find ourselves trapped in this exhausting cycle, a psychological tug of war where both sides are pulling with all their might, completely unaware that the ultimate power, the true power, lies in simply letting go of the rope. Psychology tells us that when we react with volume, we aren't projecting strength. No, we are revealing our vulnerability. We are essentially handing the keys to our emotional house to someone else and letting them rearrange the furniture. True mastery. It isn't about crushing an opponent under the weight of your words, firmly but calmly. It is about emotional regulation, the ability to remain the eye of the storm while the winds of conflict howl all around you. Encouragingly, today we are shifting the paradigm from the victimhood of your temper to the mastery of the room. I am going to reveal 3 specific sentences that function as psychological bypasses. Pointedly, they ignore the ego, they disarm the defense mechanisms of others, and they allow you to navigate any confrontation with the poise of someone who has already won, whispering with impact. By the end of this, you won't just know what to say, you will understand why the quietest voice is often the most influential. Ladies and gentlemen, why is it, that a simple disagreement over something as trivial as the dishes or a missed deadline can feel like a direct assault on our very souls? To truly understand how to end a conflict, we must first understand the invisible war happening beneath the surface of every single exchange. You see, your brain, it does not distinguish between a physical threat and a social one. When someone challenges your perspective, your amygdala, that ancient alarm bell center of your mind, fires off as if a predator is in the room. This is the evolutionary urge to win. In the days of our ancestors, being wrong often meant being cast out of the tribe, which you see was a death sentence. Today, that same survival instinct manifests as a desperate need to have the last word. But somber and reflective. But there is a high price, a very high price, for this primitive victory. We have all experienced the argument hangover, right? It's that heavy, hollow sensation in your chest that lingers long after the shouting has stopped. You may have proven your point. You may have backed them into a corner with logic and facts. But as you sit in the silence that follows, you realize the air in the room has turned cold. Ladies and gentlemen, we must face a sobering, philosophical truth. If you win the argument, but lose the person's heart, you haven't won anything at all. Sad and reflective. You have simply built a monument to your own ego out of the wreckage of a relationship. Direct and piercing. When we fight to win, we aren't seeking truth. We are seeking dominance. And dominance, you see, is the enemy of intimacy. This raises a profound question. How do we stop this cycle before the damage becomes permanent? How do we protect our peace without sacrificing our dignity? The answer lies in shifting your objective from being right to being heard, and more importantly, hearing. But even when we understand this intellectually, the heat of the moment, it often blinds us. We feel that surge of adrenaline, and those hurtful words sit right on the tip of our tongue, ready to be launched like weapons. However, there is a secret to bypassing this biological trap, a way to step out of the line of fire entirely. Because while the ego demands a battle, the soul craves a resolution. And as it turns out, the most powerful way to disarm an opponent isn't to hit harder, but to change the rules of the game entirely. But how do you do that when the other person is already screaming? How do you maintain your poise when your own ego is begging you to fight back? The calm and promising? The answer, you see, is simpler than you think. Softly. And it starts with a psychological pivot that most people never see coming. Ladies and gentlemen, we must first confront a hard truth about human interaction. We are almost never fighting about the topic at hand. When a conversation turns into a conflict, the subject matter, whether it's a missed deadline, a forgotten chore, or a difference in opinion, well, it becomes a mere shadow. What is actually happening beneath the surface, you see, is a frantic, unspoken battle for emotional safety. Psychologically, when someone raises their voice or attacks your character, their ego has perceived a threat. They aren't necessarily trying to be right. They are simply trying to feel secure. And most of us, we fall into the trap of responding with our own defensive fire, thinking that if we can just prove our point, the war will end. Seriously, ladies and gentlemen, fire cannot extinguish fire. It only consumes the oxygen in the room until the relationship itself begins to suffocate. This brings us to the sanctuary of silence. You see, silence is often misunderstood as a sign of weakness or a forfeit of the argument. Firmly, it is one of the most sophisticated boundaries you can set. When you stop defending your position and instead offer a moment of stillness, you are refusing to provide the friction the other person's ego needs to keep burning. By choosing not to participate in the escalation, you are making a profound psychological pivot. You are shifting your focus from winning the point to protecting the connection. You begin to look past their harsh words and see the human experience behind them. A person who, in that moment, feels invisible or undervalued. Validation, is the water that puts off the ego's flame. When you validate their experience, not necessarily their opinion, but the reality of their feelings, the conflict loses its power over you. In this sanctuary, winning is redefined. It is no longer about the conviction of being right. It is about the strength of maintaining the bond. Silence, when used correctly, is not a wall. It is a bridge that allows the heat of the moment to dissipate.
But how do you bridge that gap, right? Without sounding condescending. How do you use this stillness to command respect rather than project coldness? There is a specific way to frame your presence that makes the other person stop in their tracks and reflect on their own behavior. And as we move forward, you'll see that the most effective way to end the battle isn't by having the last word, but by knowing exactly which word to withhold. Because the real secret to psychological dominance isn't noise, it's the calm that follows the storm. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally arrived at the core of our exploration, the actual protocol that transforms psychological theory into true social mastery. You see, when the air is thick with tension and the ego begins to tower over reason, you do not need more volume. No, you need precision. These are the 3 linguistic keys that act as an emotional circuit breaker, stopping an escalation in its tracks before it consumes the connection. The first key is designed to immediately neutralize the defensive walls of your counterpart. When someone is shouting or projecting,
They are usually fueled by the fear of being misunderstood. To dismantle this, you must simply say, I can see how you'd feel that way. Psychologically, this is an act of profound validation. It is important to note, ladies and gentlemen, that validation is not the same as agreement. I mean, you're not conceding that their logic is sound or that their facts are correct. Shh. You are simply acknowledging the reality of their internal state. By mirroring their emotion, you soothe the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and signal that you are not a threat. The moment they feel seen, the need to defend themselves begins to evaporate. However, once the walls are down, the energy of the conflict still exists. It just needs a new direction, right? Firmly yet gentle. This is where the second key comes into play. You must pivot the dynamic by asking, how can we solve this as a team? This is a psychological reframing technique. It shifts the paradigm from an adversarial me versus you to a collaborative us versus the problem. In the heat of an argument, people often get stuck in a competitive loop where winning is the only goal. This sentence forces a cognitive shift, demanding that the other person move from their emotional center into their executive function, the part of the brain responsible for logic and problem solving. It invites them to step beside you rather than standing against you. But we must be realistic. There are moments when the other person is not yet ready for a solution. With empathy, their pride may be too wounded, or the storm inside them may still be too violent to reason with. Philosophical. In these instances, the most powerful move is to protect the sanctity of the relationship and your own mental clarity. The third and final key is a graceful exit. I value our peace more than being right in this moment. This is the ultimate display of psychological dominance, even though it sounds like a surrender. By prioritizing peace over the win, you are demonstrating a level of emotional maturity that the other person simply cannot argue with. You are essentially stepping out of the cycle of escalation while maintaining your full dignity. You aren't saying they are right. You are saying that the harmony between you is worth more than the cheap satisfaction of a verbal victory.